Hi, I'm Levi, and this is Not About You. Not About You is a podcast about identity and social justice. I'm the producer and host of the show, and I wanted to make something where a white, straight, cisgendered man, that's me, connected with folks with different lived experiences from my own about the ways parts of their identities bump up against injustices. We talked about race, gender, religion, representation, protests, politics, relationships, and more. I'm putting out 10 episodes as a first season of the show. I'll put out 5, and then a week or so later I'll put out another 5. While they'll be numbered 1 through 10, you can certainly listen to any or all of them in whatever order you choose. Each of these conversations was recorded from late August of 2016 into mid-October of 2016, before the 2016 presidential election. My hope is that this series leads to more conversation and interaction. I want folks who are hesitant or new to standing in these struggles to feel more comfortable showing up for change and asking questions. I want underrepresented voices to have new ways to be amplified and supported. I've set up a voicemail line, 612-361-9261, where you can share comments, suggestions, and personal stories of your own that may be used in future episodes of this show. If you tell me which episode you're responding to, that will help me make follow-up episodes with voicemail responses. Call 612-361-9261 with your questions, comments, or stories. And other than that, you can respond on all the social media channels. I hope you'll listen with an open mind and an open heart. I know I've made a lot of mistakes in these conversations, and I'll make more to come. And I welcome you to join me as I try to learn and grow. This is Not About You.
So my name's Jun Li Wang. I'm a community organizer. So I work for Springboard for the Arts, which is a community and economic development organization. I culturally identify as Chinese American, particularly here
In Minnesota.
Yeah. Because people remind me of that all the time.
That you're Chinese American?
Well, that I'm not mainstream white.
Oh, okay.
Not that I ever thought I was white, but I grew up in California with, other Chinese family and friends, but also with Caucasian family and friends. Not family in the blood sense, but, sort of uncles and aunts and good family friends. There were moments certainly like at school and whatnot where I understood that I was not white and that I was Chinese, but it wasn't sort of part of my narrative growing up that I was Chinese American. I was just, me, a kid, a girl, that kind of thing. And I don't think it was until college and then post-college years that I started to identify more that way, but primarily because of the context I was in. And then in Minnesota, because people see me that way, and I also see how other people of color are treated, I think I've sort of latched onto that identity in a more strong way than I might have had I stayed in California.
Does it feel more pronounced being in a place that has...
Well,
what's the difference?
Right. Well, so it's more pronounced. For instance, so one of my first jobs here, it was organizing, and I was at a meeting and we had funders there, and at a certain point, and I was the youngest person in the room, and I was also, I'm trying to remember, I was for sure the youngest person in the room, and halfway through the meeting, one of the funders said to me, "Oh, it's just so wonderful. You're such a credit to young people of color." And I thought, why can't I just be a credit to young people or to people or people who want to be organizers? Like, why do I have to only be a credit to young people of color? And I was really surprised by that. And I think it was then that I realized in Minnesota, that's the first thing people see, or the first thing people think when they see me is like, oh, maybe she's a woman and she's young, but also, or equally, she is Asian or not white.
Are you excited to get away from young and then you can finally just be not white? Is that part?
That will take a while because I look a lot younger than I am. And so I do say to some people, I was like, I can't wait until I'm like a little old Asian lady and can be really bossy and nobody will get upset. And then some of my friends are like, but Jun Li, you're already bossy. And I'm like, but I could be more bossy. So
you'll just get a pass.
Right, totally.
I like that way of being excited about the way you can use
aging.
the stereotype to your advantage.
Totally. Like, I can't wait until I'm like, we all have those elders in our family, right? They've become old, and some of them are more wise and some of them are less wise, but they can say whatever they want. And people are like, oh, okay.
Because we've given up on that fight.
Well, I'm hoping that in my case it'll be because I have, wise things to say and people won't push back on them. So there was that moment of being, credit to, people like me. And then I grew up in a household and an environment where in many ways I'm, very sort of Westerner American. Like, I'm a little too confident. I feel very comfortable being plain spoken. And so what I saw here in Minnesota was that other people of color, or particularly young, Asian women, like, they were having very different experiences from my experience. And I recognized that I have, because of who I am and because of, anyway, I just felt like there was a different kind of role I could play here than I might have felt in California, because I feel comfortable using my voice and I was in positions where I had the ear of people who are influencers. And so I think in the context of Minnesota, I felt like, I can use this to my advantage and hopefully to my community of people of color, to the advantage of that of our community.
So it sounds a little bit like maybe because you had this experience of not learning the upper Midwestern culture of passive aggression, or we don't talk about ourselves that way. It gave you space to be an advocate, to fight against other culturally specific problems around a group that you shared a sort of ethnic category with?
Yeah, and this makes it sound all like very conscious and, organized and
you
planful.
Moved here to help.
And very planful, and it wasn't. I think it was more just like I found myself in positions where I was like, oh, my voice as an Asian person can make a difference here. Or I can stand up in a certain way for people of color or for Asians, or, it's sort of that, like, I can be an example, right?
Yeah.
And as much as I resist that sort of like, typecasting people or categorizing people, I do think that in Minnesota we do have a lot of problems around race. And so if I can use what I have in a good way, then I should. And here that happens to be that I'm Asian and I'm comfortable with that and I can be outspoken. And a lot of that is that I work with people and organizations where I have a lot of connections in that world. So that's a platform for me to use.
In what ways is there frustration for you that you have to be an Asian person,
right,
doing work representing Asian people?
I've sort of gotten over it, but it is very frustrating. And my husband, who's white, he and I laugh about it a lot because, in many ways, sort of culturally, I'm not a very good Asian. I'm particularly not a very good Asian female, which is to say, and I was brought up to be one of the conflicts for me is that on the one hand, I was brought up to be a very good, obedient Chinese girl, which is you pay attention to what other people in the room want, you guess their needs before they have them, and you try to figure out how to solve those things. But on the other hand, I also am I believe in fairness and righteousness, and I don't like it when people are mean to other people, those kinds of things, and then I get involved. And that's not culturally really what I'm supposed to do. So I think there's sort of conflicts within me, but then also, when I come, in the context of Minnesota, and then culturally, sort of the Minnesota culture of passive aggressiveness and not really saying what you think, like I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to be that way. So so there are often conflicts, and my husband and I joke about me doing these things. And we also recognize that I can get away with some of it because I think, because I look and I can talk in a way that disarms people and isn't threatening, right? I'm kind of a small Asian woman. I don't look like I can raise my voice or beat you up, but I think I can. So, so I'm like, maybe you shouldn't put that.
No, I love that. Your secret skill, your secret trick is no one expects you to be confident and loud.
And I swear, I can swear. I try not to professionally, but I mean, I have some, and it probably bothers my mom a lot. Like I have part of me that can be a very angry person. And so I can pull that out when I need to, but I don't usually have to. But it's there, right? It's there.
What are some things that make you angry? And when do you have to decide when it's not professional to take up something that's a problem and when it is? Like, how do you push for change when you still have to think things like, for you, I'm with a funder right now, and they use the wrong word, but how do I correct them without having my feelings be involved?
Right, or jeopardize my job.
Yeah.
What
brings
angry?
the Hulk, the Jun Li
Well,
Wang?
it's sort of like people being mean, people being unfair, unkind, and mean. And we don't see that much here in Minnesota because people are sort of surface level polite.
What doesn't seem mean?
It doesn't, right. So it's, it's kind of hard to respond to passive aggressiveness. Yeah. I mean, or to get really fired up about it. Well, I get fired up about it. I get really irritated by it. You can tell I'm like, ah. So yeah, I'm just trying to think what makes me really angry. Yeah, just when people are mean and unfair, and treat people very differently, blatantly. Yeah.
Do you separate out the systemic unfairness and the specific in the moment unfairness of, the thing you just did is really unfair versus this whole structure is unfair, which I know you're finding ways to address as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this is where sort of I am professionally an organizer, but it also makes a lot of sense in terms of my personality. I think of myself, actually probably before I think of myself as Chinese American, I think of my identity as an organizer, right? And so I see both sides of that. So I see how a person can be racist or prejudiced and say really horrible things, but I can also understand that they are a product of this system and society, which, in some ways doesn't make it easy because you understand why they're a jerk, right? The system has made them that way. But at the same time, I think it's very helpful to understand that there are two things happening, right? I think, I've thought about this a lot because I think, there are some people who are jerks to everybody. But I think as a person of color, you don't know if that jerk is being a jerk to you because you're a person of color or because they're just always that way with everyone. And that's that kind of tension that always exists for a person of color. Is that person saying that to me because they're only looking at me as a person of color and making assumptions, or are they just an asshole, all around, all the time?
Yeah, that's funny. I can always, since I'm a straight white dude, if someone's a jerk to me, it's an individual experience.
Right.
It's about them treating me this way. It's not them having a problem with my group.
Right.
So I get to even do the thing of, maybe they're having a bad day.
Right.
Whereas you have to go, is this about my race or is this just about this person in this moment?
Right.
And I have to take a step to get to that thought. That does not occur to me at all.
Yeah.
I'm very lucky.
Yeah. Well, right. I mean, it makes every sort of interaction, it takes more energy for starters because there are all these other things you have to think about and sort of judge. And then you have to decide whether you're going to try and engage with that, whatever the person has said. Are you going to push? Are you just going to be like, okay, and walk away?
In that area of what a person has said, when I was asking about doing this, we talked about a couple of what are common things said. And one of the things that came up, I think, was when someone says, where are you from?
Right.
And someone asked me where am I from, and I can say St. Paul.
Right.
But if you say Berkeley, that might not be enough of an answer.
Right. And actually, recently I did say to somebody St. Paul, and I know they were really confused, but they didn't press any further.
But they wanted to?
Yeah, I was at Como with my family, and my son was talking to this cute elderly white couple, who's waiting for the band to start. And I came over, and they're like, oh, hi, your son's so cute. Oh, where are you from? And I was like, we're all here at the Como Pavilion, where only locals really come. So I was like, St. Paul. And I could tell.
Were you being willfully obtuse, or were you...
A little
you
bit.
didn't even think of it? Oh, you knew.
A little bit.
Yeah.
I knew what she was asking, but I chose not to answer.
Yeah.
So I just said, oh, St. Paul. And part of that is because in Minnesota, people don't think people are from here unless they've been here for generations, that their family's been here for generations. So I kind of pushed back on that notion that you can't be from here until you've like lived and died here. So there's that sort of Minnesota narrative of where you're from. And then of course there's the, no, but really where are you from? And so, but sometimes, other people will push on that question and they'll say, no, really, where are you from? And then I'll say, oh, Berkeley, California. And then they're like, they're kind
going.
of, right, keep going.
What, do you have a sense, how frequent is that kind of question? For each of these 10 episodes of Not About You, I put out requests for folks to call in with responses to questions that come up in each episode. So a few people left voicemails, and I'll be sharing some of those in the middle of some of these conversations. You have reached the Not About You voicemail line. Leave a message after the tone.
My childhood was filled with this question, so I never got it when I was alone, but my parents have accents, and they would get it all the time. My dad would always say California, where he had previously lived, because he was annoyed with the question. And I think because the question bothered him, it bothered me. I haven't really thought about it in many years, but then I was at my friend's garage sale the other day, and she's from Iran, and she has this gorgeous accent. And this guy at her sale immediately asked her where she was from. And I think he was just sincerely curious, but I immediately flinched in this sort of visceral, ishy way, and it just really bothered me. The sideways question that I would always get as a kid from adults, of course, was, so, what kind of last name is that? And it felt super sideways, like even then, and I would have just preferred that they asked directly what my heritage was, but, I think even more I just would have preferred to blend in with all my little blonde friends.
Hey Levi, this is Taj. I really love this question because I get asked it a lot. When people ask me where I'm from, I'll joke around and I'll usually say, oh, Minnesota, and they'll usually go, no, but where are you from? And I'll be like, oh, South Minneapolis. And I know what they're trying to get at, but they're like, no, but where are you from originally? And I'll still jerk them around and be like, my mother's womb. But then I usually give in and I'll tell them my background, which is what they're actually trying to ask me. Or as I've been told before, because a lot of people don't know, I've been called soft ethnic or the safe choice by people in the industry. But yeah, that's usually how I respond. I'll just say, I'm like, oh, I'm from Minnesota, from South Minneapolis, to be real specific about it. Sometimes I'll give them my address. I'm like, this is a street that I grew up on, but then I moved when I was 2, just to see how they react. Sometimes it's funny, or sometimes I'll just say my mom is Sri Lankan and my dad is American. Depends on my mood, but generally speaking, I like to see how they react when I ask that question and how they change their answer and why. Oh, this was long-winded. I apologize. Okay, I'll talk to you later. Okay, I don't know how this works. Bye.
Now let's get back to the conversation. Do you have a sense, how frequent is that kind of question?
Well, right now, it isn't that frequent now, I think partly because of the work that I do and that I know a lot of people around town, and the work I do is with many people of color and people who understand better that people are from here, even though, from the U.S., even though they aren't white. So I don't get asked that too often. I think when I first came here, I got it asked more. That was asked more often because I didn't know as many people. And it hasn't happened in a while, but I used to, a lot of times people would say, oh, your English is so good. And then, that's where I'm like, yeah, because I'm from here. And then, usually I depart that conversation.
I wonder if that's an okay thing to say to anybody. Oh, your English is so good. So what if that isn't their first language? If you're not their teacher,
right?
Why do you think someone feels the need to say that?
I have no idea.
I would love to hear your thoughts about, I think your English is so good, and where are you really from? For a lot of people who have said those things feel like harmless things to say.
Right.
And I'm curious if you can talk about what the harm it does do.
Yeah.
And if you have any sense of why people feel the urge to, like...
Well, I think,
people, I don't want to talk about the weather. That's boring. But why do they jump to that?
Right. But it's very safe. Well, I think... So let me try and think why people ask that. I think it's because people have a need to compartmentalize and sort of like quickly slot a person into a category that they understand, right? That's sort of out of convenience. And we all do that to a certain degree. But I think the experience for the other person is that I'm putting you in a separate category from me. I have, my English is good, and oh, yours is too. Imagine that. And so I think it is, the where are you from implies that you're not from here because I have to ask you or I have to point it out, right? Because if I was a white person, even if I was from France, like I don't, well, if I was from France and I had a French accent, then that'd be a different thing. I was like, oh, I don't know how to think about that. But it wouldn't be about separating out. I think it wouldn't be about putting you in a different category or saying, oh, your English is so good. Maybe you are like me.
You're not as foreign as
You're
I
not
thought.
as alien as I thought
Yeah.
you were.
Do you think, is it coded in that I'm a little bit afraid right now? How afraid should I be?
Or like, so I have a lot of thoughts about like how people view things that they don't understand or aren't familiar with. So I think this has changed over the decades. So I have traveled a lot and I've been in places where like I don't understand what the hell's going on. I can't understand traffic. I can't understand how people are interacting. I just don't understand what's happening. And I translate that for me as, I don't know, but it's kind of curious and interesting, and I would like to know more. But I think a lot of people translate something they're unfamiliar with into something they should be fearful of, rather than curious. And so I think a lot of our problems today actually stem from that notion of something unfamiliar is fearful. Like, oh, the city, I'm not familiar with the layout and how there are black people in the city, so I think it's the ghetto and it's scary. People jump to those sort of fearful conclusions rather than saying, oh, it's an environment I'm unfamiliar with, but I should be curious and open-minded, and I shouldn't be scared. I don't know if I'm explaining it very well.
No, I love that. I think sort of a lack of curiosity.
Right, sort of jumping to fear before anything else.
I think not being curious feels to me might be connected to a worry that you're going to feel dumb or look dumb or say the wrong thing.
For sure.
Which then leads to saying the wrong thing.
Right. For sure the saying the wrong thing is, I see that happen all the time. And I see it more in like the older generation of saying, it's that whole Minnesota, like, we're all alike, so I'm just going to ignore the fact that you're black or Asian. I'm just going to pretend you're like me. And it's like, but we're not the same, right?
You're not that good at pretending.
Right, you're not that good at pretending. And so I'll see people try to describe a person and they'll leave out sort of the ethnicity or the race of a person. And it's really weird when people try to do that, but that's, at least in Minnesota, I think what's going on is people are like, oh, if I say like, I met this black guy, that means I'm racist because I noticed he was black and I'm saying it out loud, and that's hard, right? Then how are you, and at one level it's like, oh, like, yeah, you met a guy and you had an interesting conversation. Does it matter that he was black or not? No, but when we share our experiences, we put detail in it so that people can also imagine, what we're talking about. But there's something weird there where all of a sudden people get really awkward about
I think the problem would be, I met this black guy and he didn't rob me. Then suddenly
right.
You're doing it wrong.
Right.
I think they're worried about the wrong thing.
Right.
Which maybe is actually revealing of some racist ideas that they have.
Because they're so worried about saying the wrong thing that they're thinking about the wrong thing.
They're filtering everything because of what needs to be filtered.
Yeah.
That's what I've decided to say.
Minnesotans are Minnesotans are complicated.
If someone was going to tell somebody who doesn't know you that they just talked to you, what would be the right thing to, like, I just met this this Asian lady who spoke really good English.
Right. Yes, for sure. That's what they should say. And she says she's from here, but it's kind of weird because she doesn't look like she's from here. No. But she's, yeah.
I don't think she's Scandinavian at all.
No, she's definitely not Scandinavian. I think, I think somebody may say like, oh, I met this person, she works at this place, and, she's Asian American from California, maybe if they learn that or something. From people like East Coasters can tell that I'm from California. And that has nothing to do with my ethnicity, right? That has to do with sort of the way I talk and certain words that I use. I don't use hella anymore, but that's a big giveaway.
Did you have to get rid of that?
Hella. Well, because, I lived abroad for a long time, and that's not a very useful word.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't mean very much, actually. So, yeah, certain words that I would have used, right out of high school, I don't use anymore.
Which I think is good for all of us.
I think so, too.
To get rid of our high school words.
Probably.
I mean, you can hold on to a few.
Yeah, there's some good swear words that are good through the ages. So,
so there's two things. Can you talk a little bit about the work you're doing with board repair?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you call that a project, an organization.
I don't know what I call it either.
What is board repair?
Right. So board repair is a network that I started 2 years ago out of frustration with my own experience being on a nonprofit board. And so since I moved here, I've been on a board, and I get asked like once a month to be on somebody's board. And I say no because, I'll only be on one board at a time because I think that's the only way I can be useful to that organization. And people are asking me, they know me, so they're asking me, but it appears that I'm the only person of color that they know. And so they've asked me to be on their board. So I both got, I still feel I'm not a people pleaser, but I like to solve problems. So when somebody asks me to be on a board, part of me really wants to be like, yeah, I'll do that, because I like your mission and I want to be helpful. But
it's also just nice to be like someone saying they want you for something.
Right. It's nice. Right. Yeah. So a little part of me is like, oh, I can't be helpful. But then it's also really frustrating because I'm like, really? You don't know anyone else to ask? Like, stop. How come everybody's just asking me, right? And so, and then I would meet, there's sort of like that group of more visible people of color who are, in nonprofits, our staff. And I think we all get asked all the time to join boards. So there are, I don't know, probably, easily a couple hundred of us around town, but it's the same 100 of us who get asked. And then I see other people of color who are passionate about all kinds of issues and I think would be interested. Maybe they do work for nonprofits or they work in the public sector and they're not asked. And so board repair was sort of a way to solve that problem. So it started out as a network of people of color supporting other people of color to join boards. And so we did a couple different things and, we had some success. And, I had this idea and I sort of vetted it with other people of color that I knew. And then I asked them to sort of pass the idea on to other people who didn't know me because I wanted to make sure it wasn't just about my friends saying, oh yeah, Jun Li, that's a good idea. So I actually had in this sort of initial leadership group, most of the people were not people I knew, which for me was, felt like real validation because these were other people of color who were leaders in their own way who thought this was a needed thing. And it had nothing to do with me. So we started this thing, and it was kind of slow going, but there was a lot of interest in it. And then last year, we realized that even though we were having sort of trainings, and we had a list of organizations that wanted board members, so we realized that even though we sort of had these mechanisms in place, individuals still weren't making that leap to joining a board. Like, so there's something hard about picking up the phone or emailing the executive director or the nominations chair, of an organization, even though we had all these people who were interested in the idea. So last year we had a matchmaking fair because I was like, oh, what people need is that even 3-minute face-to-face introduction, and that will make it easier for both sides, certainly for the person of color, to either reach out to that organization or when the organization reaches out to them, they can say, oh yeah, we met, I know your face, your friendly face. So we held that last year and it was very successful. We had 100 some organizations attend, 200 people of color, And we did a lot of matchmaking. And so over a few months, we think 30 to 50 people of color in the Twin Cities joined boards because of that one event. We just held another one last week. Numbers were a little different, but we had really great feedback. The people of color who attended, the ones that we, talked to, were super focused. They were like, I'm here to join a board. I am, looking at the list of 100-some organizations that are here, and I'm marking off who are, I'm targeting my top 5, going to meet them. So that was really great to see. And I think, the reason I'm in the nonprofit sector, so it's the place that I know best. And so that's where I can make an impact.
Well, let me ask you a dumb question. Why does it matter if there are people of color on nonprofit board of directors? Why does it matter to the nonprofit? Why does it matter to the people? Who cares?
This is a question that's asked often, and I'm always like, isn't it just so obvious? But, okay, so there are a couple different things. One is nonprofits serve the public, right? They serve the community, they serve the public, and that is everybody who is here, right, to some degree. Obviously, if you're a youth organization, you serve youth, but their role is a public role, and if they aren't serving the whole public, let's see. I don't know how do I want to say this. So a lot of organizations, the people they serve, or their clients, or the youth they work with, most often that's a very diverse group of people, right? And sometimes it's more people of color than white people, right? And that there's nobody in leadership that reflects the diversity of the people that they serve is both like an equity issue and a justice issue and a fairness issue. And long term, because I think in the nonprofit sector, I think we should all be trying to work ourselves out of a job. To not have the people who directly know your programs and work, to not have them involved in the decision making is wrong. It's just wrong. I think that every organization should be building sort of a pipeline or that ladder so that people they may initially be serving through services can imagine themselves or find themselves in a position to be working at the organization or on the board or the executive director. And then also there's, when we look at, people need to see people like themselves in positions of power and positions of leadership. And so how can we expect, a young person of color to imagine that they could run a nonprofit or be on a board and influence how that nonprofit is run if they don't see anyone like themselves? And I think this is sometimes a hard thing for white people to recognize, because you're used to seeing your face everywhere. So you don't think about what it's like not to see somebody who looks like you. So that makes it all the more important for people of color to see themselves reflected in all sectors, all levels of leadership.
So representation matters.
Representation matters. Representation absolutely matters.
Yeah.
Both in terms of people being able to aspire to certain things, but also in terms of fairness and perspective, right? It's really, an organization that serves all kinds of people needs to have perspectives of all kinds of people. It can't be, we know most founding boards are usually the founder and their friends, right? Like, those people are going to be more alike than not. They're going to have, very similar perspectives, and you need to shake that up too. So I also think it's about health of the sector. I don't think the nonprofit sector can be healthy and innovative and change if it's always the same people making decisions.
I think that's great, and I think you and I have vastly different experiences, and we may be on a board and come to the same conclusion around a board decision, but come to it from very different ways, and that seems really important too.
Right.
Even if it doesn't seem like a big difference.
Yeah. And then, I think there's, the different ways, and you may come to the same decision, but you've sort of gone through examining different perspectives in different ways. And then sometimes it also does, make a difference. There are decisions that are actually different because you have different perspectives at the table. If your board membership is full of people who have 2 cars and never use transit, then they have a certain worldview. And if you have somebody on the board who is a transit user, or their family is, uses transit, or doesn't have a cabin up north, that's going to influence decision making, because there's going to be a broader understanding of the people that you might be working with.
Can you talk about your ideas around privilege and ways you see privilege in your own life?
Yeah. I feel very privileged.
You mean just to spend time with me?
Yes, absolutely, Levi. To be sitting here in a room with just you. Yes. Well, no, I mean, there is a certain amount of privilege, right? You know me because, or I know you because I have a certain kind of job where networks are shared freely and I work with good people who know other good people. Like, that's a privilege, right?
Yeah.
It's a privilege to be able to take time off, quote unquote, to do this with you, right?
Yeah.
Not everybody can just be like, oh, sure, I can meet you Wednesday, 9:15.
Yeah.
You know, not have to worry about my boss asking me, you know, who happens to be your wife, but not having to worry about my boss needing to know where I am.
Yeah.
Those are all privileges. So
You did ask me not to tell her where you are.
I didn't put it on my calendar or anything.
No.
She does not have access to my calendar. No. So yeah, so there are all kinds of privileges, and I have, I think, one of my largest privileges, biggest privileges, is that I was raised in an environment and I was educated in a way to feel very confident, and I think that's a huge privilege, and maybe a bit of an anomaly for, you know, sort of like being an Asian woman, and particularly when I see other Asian women who didn't get that support when they were growing up, or, you know, had different experiences when they went to school. So I recognize that that's a huge privilege. And because I have a certain kind of confidence, though it may be obnoxious at times, I can do things that I want to do or that I think are important. And that's huge.
So I'm a white person.
Oh.
Sorry. Spoiler alert. And I'm also a man, like a cisgendered man. What can I do, or someone like me do, to help?
Yeah. It's like, oh,
Which
God,
is,
right.
Also, I should have done my dumb question alert, because I can acknowledge that question is loaded with putting burden on you.
Right.
It's a little condescending.
Right.
It has a lot of other pieces to it.
Right.
But I think that is a question a lot of people like me want to ask. People
Right.
of color, and it's annoying.
Right.
So let me annoy you.
Well, and so, and I just want to, you know, that idea of helping, and I think, you know, yeah, it's not a dumb question. It's a tough question. And in it, that idea that you can help implies that people need your help, right? Mm-hmm. But I think in this case, we all are in this together. Like, we all need to help each other. And I don't mean individually, like every person of color is responsible for helping white people understand what it's like to be a person of color. But what I mean is for better or worse, whatever color, gender we are, we're in this together. And if we want a better world, then I think we each need to do at least a piece of something that maybe fits our personality and where we are in the world. But, you know, your question, I think, for instance, like you doing this podcast is really helpful, because we can do this interview and then hopefully lots of people will listen to it, and then they don't have to ask me or the two other Asian people they know all the same question, right? So I think using the networks and skills that you have to capture information and then share it with more people, I think that's helpful, right? So like what you're doing, you're going to interview 10 people and ask them some of the same questions, but our stories will be shared with more people without me literally having to have that conversation, or some other Asian person having to have that conversation.
That feels really important, the piece about find out the skills and networks you have and how can those be leveraged to engage or amplify, rather than having it look like how you've seen someone else be a part of progress or change.
Right.
Because I think that's the first impulse. Oh, I've seen people march and shut down a street to address an issue. I guess I need to find a way to do that.
Right. And if you want to do that, great. Not everybody's a protester.
No.
Right? And like, that's where,
and please find some experienced protesters. Don't just do it yourself.
Right. I mean, that's, I was talking to a black friend of mine around
Why didn't
protest.
You just say a friend? I mean,
well, because this is important. And she and I were, so there were some protests coming up, and she and I were both sort of commiserating, because we're like, oh, we felt bad that we weren't protest people. Like, we did not want to go. Like, that just wasn't the style of how we work. And we're both strong, righteous, organized people who are getting stuff done and making the world better, but we both were like, oh, we feel guilty for not, wanting to go out and march. But also realizing like you can't do everything and you can't be everyone and you can't do all the things. And so there are certain people who the way they work is to go out and rally and march. Sometimes they're the people who lead those things, and other times they're the sort of followers. But we all can't do everything, right? So it's looking at what are your existing networks and strengths. And I would say to a white person, like, start not necessarily literally at home, but start at home, right? Who can you influence because they already have a relationship with you? Whether it's, in your case, you have a relationship with all of your podcast listeners, as well as the people you sort of see and know. So how can you use that, and how can you influence them? It's sort of like on Facebook, where like some of us post articles, not because, partly because we think there are some of our friends on the edges or relatives that like should probably read it, right? Not because our closest circle of friends needs to know like that there are these injustices. So it's like, how do you nudge who you know into a slightly better place? The other thing I was just thinking about was, and it goes back to the sort of treating the unfamiliar as something therefore fearful, is building new relationships. And that's tricky because you can't just walk up to somebody and be like, hey, you're a person of color, can I be your friend because I don't know any other people of color? Like that's creepy. But, can you put yourself in places, more naturally, where you experience different kinds of people, different cultures, have even small conversations with different people just so you understand or have some interactions. I think those all make a difference.
That seems really important, and I think one thing you're touching on there is I am a white person, and I realize I have to choose to be uncomfortable. My default is I get to be around a bunch of faces who look like me, like you said. That is often not the case for someone like you.
Right.
You have to go seek out a room full of people who look more like you,
right,
and have more of your shared experience.
Which also isn't necessarily comfortable for me. And so I mean, it's like,
let's get into that.
Right. Oh, that's much more complicated, probably. That isn't necessarily comfortable either.
Sure.
But it's also different.
Yeah.
Right. It's a different kind of uncomfortable.
Right. Part of it is just go to spaces you don't normally go to.
Right.
And that is how you'll make new relationships with people who are not like you. You have to actually go seek it out. It won't just happen.
It won't just happen. Right. And you can't just go talk to one person standing on the street corner, because that's weird.
We can't solve it with technology.
Well, no, I was trying to think, because I also do this other thing about how to welcome newcomers to Minnesota.
Yeah.
And
how much of that has to do with your own experience?
Everything,
so,
right? It's called St. Paul Hello, and we're actually transitioning. So this has been our pilot year, and actually we're expanding to MSP Hello.
Oh, not just
in the fall. Right. So I was just thinking about the make a friend kind of notion, and part of it is when I moved here, my husband had a job here, so we moved here, and it was like the first year was really hard for me because nobody would talk to me, and I would try and network with a small N. I didn't have to find a job, and people were just really weird about it, and I thought it was personal. I thought I came off as desperate, or I, was stinky, or, I didn't know what was going on until a professor at the Humphrey said to me, she said, Jun Li, what you're doing right now is really hard. She's like, I came here to the Humphrey, and I thought, I would have an instant community and, an instant academic sort of community. And she said it took her 6 years to feel like she had a home and a community. And I thought, I can't wait 6 years. It's got to be, I'm willing to stick around for 2 years or I'm out of here. But her telling me that helped a lot. But I was just thinking, because we've been talking about sometimes you need a one-to-one interaction. So one of the ideas we have for sort of the future is like coffee dates. So when you're new to a place, somebody can give you resource sheets and you can, get your warm hat for the Minnesota winter. But sometimes you want a real person to tell you like, oh yeah, these are the best coffee shops in town. And that place, it's okay, whatever. Like sometimes you just want that. But I don't think a coffee date with a person of color has quite the same thing. I don't know. I don't know that would work.
No,
I'm not sure there are any people of color who would be up for that coffee date.
You need a different model.
Yes, I think it's a different mechanism.
Just making new friends.
Right. On the other hand, as I just sort of think about this, I think that like if it was a coffee date, if there was somebody moving to Minnesota and they were Asian American, I would be willing to meet with them. And I'd be willing to meet with a white person, not because I wanted to become their friend or they needed a friend of color, but I think that coffee date idea might be important to sort of pair people who have potentially more similar experiences in the world.
Well, Jun Li, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
You're welcome.
So that's my conversation with Jun Li. This was the first conversation of these I recorded, and Jun Li was a friend, so that I think helped me go in a little more relaxed, because I, as you can hear, I definitely ask some dumb questions, and that's sort of part of it for me. I hope you guys appreciated the conversation, and I encourage everyone to go to tcboardrepair.org to find out about the work Jun Li is doing there. And also I'd suggest you read the work of Eric Liu. He has written some really wonderful things about being a Chinese American and helping people with their citizenship. That's Eric Liu, L-I-U. Look that up as well. And of course, please do call in with your comments, your feedback, your own personal stories. 612-361-9261. Tweet about the show. The hashtag is NAYPOD. And if you can rate and review it on iTunes, that's great. I would love to have more people know about this show, and the best way to have that happen is for it to get a lot of reviews on iTunes. Then it can get featured on iTunes. More people will hear about it, and I can be a part of fostering these conversations. That's really what I want to do. If you have personal stories to share and you want to call and leave them, that's great. If you have suggestions of other people with different lived experiences from mine who might be good guests, I'm looking for organizers, activists, educators, leaders, thinkers, and also everyday folk who know how to talk about these experiences, whether or not it's a part of their professional work. You can go to Not About You on Twitter and follow us there and interact there. I am That Levi on Twitter, @That Levi. And again, the number is 612-361-9261. And I will be, if I get some responses to this, I'll put together a follow-up voicemail episode specifically to this episode 1. I want to give a few thank yous. I want to thank Jun Li for starting this with me, not really knowing what we were going to get into. I want to thank my friend Taj, who called in on this, and you'll actually hear Taj in each episode. She left a couple of wonderful responses, and I went ahead and asked her to respond to each episode, a question from each episode, so you hear from Taj again later. And I want to thank all of you for giving this show a chance, because I'm trying something new. I hope I can be a part of amplifying and making change for myself and for the people in my life and for all of you as well. Not About You's theme song is Rebels of Our Own Kind by Twin Cities musician Charlie Van Stee. Thank you for listening to Not About You.